right now I have the honor of introducing Don Specter. He is the Executive Director of the Prison Law Office. He's going to tell you a little bit about how this came to be and how this crazy idea was born. So please welcome him. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Assemblymen and Senators. I very much appreciate being here in Oregon. A little bit about what the Prison Law Office is. We're a public interest law firm that advocates for humane conditions in correctional facilities. Most of our work is in California, but we've also done things in other states. Unfortunately, a lot of what we do is to improve conditions, is to litigate against correctional officials, and most of our litigation has occurred in California. And I've been doing this for a fairly long time, and I realize that litigation can be effective, and often, unfortunately, in this country, it is the only way to achieve reform. But it's very expensive. It takes years. It's risky. You have to get favorable court rulings. And even if you win a judgment against prison authorities, at least those in California often don't implement the court-ordered remedy in a timely manner, or even at all sometimes. So after many years of some frustration, I started looking for a different way of improving the way we treat people that we incarcerate. And it just so happened that in 2011, I was invited to participate by a professor at the University of Maryland in a tour of prisons in Germany and Scandinavia. And I have to tell you, it was a mind-altering experience without any substances used. I was literally shocked at what I saw because it was so different from the prisons I was used to. What was striking about the European facilities was their size, which was small, the sanitation, it was clean, the number of mentally ill people who were incarcerated was few, if any, the cells were actually comfortable, the work was meaningful, the pay was really substantial, the atmosphere in the prisons was calm, and the reliance on solitary confinement was rare. And very importantly for this program is the relationship between the people who were incarcerated and the staff was overall very positive, which was very different than what I was used to. So after that trip, the Prison Law Office decided to use attorney fees that we had generated from suing California so many times and being successful at it, to take several states, including Oregon, over to Europe, and particularly Norway. And the premise behind that program was that if correctional officers and state officials saw the same thing that I did when I was there, and they heard the same talks, that they would be similarly impressed, and more importantly, that they would be motivated to apply these principles and practices back home. So I'm happy to report that every single person that Bree and I have brought to Norway has come away with an entirely new appreciation of what's possible in corrections. Colette Peters, your director of corrections here, put it like this after a few days and a few beers, I think. She said that after many years as the director of the prison system, she thought she was approaching the finish line in what she described as a marathon. But after a few days in Oregon, she realized she hadn't even put her running shoes on. So as an aside, I want to say that I hope you all know how lucky you are to have Colette Peters as your director of Department of Corrections. I spend most of my professional life criticizing correctional officials, and I can tell you that she's an amazing person and one of the best administrators in the country, and so I hope you really follow her lead. I'm very happy to report that Colette and her team at the Department of Corrections have made incredible strides in taking the lessons learned from Norway and applying them here. Yesterday afternoon, I spent several hours in the Oregon State Penitentiary observing the behavioral health unit. And it was a great experience. And I went there and I was allowed to do whatever I wanted without any correctional supervision from the warden or any other one. And I found that the residents there were getting out of their cells quite a bit for both structured and unstructured activities. And the correctional officers, who told me they used to fear for their safety every day when they came to work, actually now were enjoying their job and looking forward to coming to work because they were able to help the mentally ill residents in their charge. So I wanted to share with you some of the quotes that came out of a 45-minute session where they just explained to me what they were doing. They said, just getting out of their cells is extremely helpful. Inmates want to have a conversation with staff. They never saw this happen before. You have to understand that this behavioral health unit is undergoing a change, in large part that resulted after Colette and her team came back from Norway. Before the change, these officers told me that it was us versus them, and now the officers told me that the inmates actually come to them for advice. And they have seen inmates teaching other residents how to deal with their issues and provide them with coping skills. And very importantly for the staff, they noticed that the number of staff assaults had gone way down. And they didn't really say it like this, but the bottom line of what they were telling me was that they believed that correctional officers were actually helping to reduce recidivism, which was a far cry from the usual attitude that you hear from correctional officers. So I really commend Oregon for their progress to date. What you'll hear in a few minutes from the Norwegians are a number of practical and philosophical ways in which they've transformed their prison system into one of the world's most humane and effective places that incarcerates people. But I thought it might be helpful while you're listening to our Norwegian friends to consider 2 points that I believe have particular relevance to what we do in this country. The first is human dignity. In the United States legal system, human dignity, at least for people who are incarcerated, has very narrow bounds. The Supreme Court has said that to preserve human dignity in prison, the state must only provide the essentials of life. That's food, clothing, shelter, health care, and protection from assault. But in Norway, it seems to me that they think about dignity in a broader way. It encompasses more than the prerequisites of life. They are steadfast in their belief that the deprivation of liberty is the punishment. Prisons are not intended to be houses of pain and boredom. They are designed to be as normal as possible so that the transition back into the community is as seamless as possible. What that means is that there are prisons where mothers take care of their infants and toddlers, where prisoners order, prepare, and cook their own food using knives provided by the Department of Corrections, where prisoners receive decent wages for their skilled labor, where furloughs to the community are common, and where prisoners wear civilian clothes, and where the use of solitary confinement is the rare exception. The second point about society's relationship to the people who are is about society's relationship to the people who are in prison. In Norway, one of their fundamental principles, as you heard from Senator Winters, is to try to make sure that people leaving prison are good neighbors. And I will let the Norwegians, explain what they mean by that and how they do it. But it made me think about whether our society really wants these individuals to be our neighbors. Right now, I think not. From the moment people are arrested until they walk out the door of the jail or the prison, they are often subjected to degrading and humiliating experiences that are inherent in our prison systems throughout the country. that tell them that they have little or no worth. And when their term is finished, they are left on the street with little or no money and numerous barriers to employment and housing. And even if they are lucky enough to participate in programs or reentry programs in prison or reentry programs prior to their release or even after their release, many employment and housing barriers remain, not to mention the difficulty of having to navigate society with an addiction. Under these circumstances, is it really realistic to think that our communities would welcome these people back as neighbors? So one of the many things that I learned from our Norwegian hosts is that if we really want good neighbors, we have to embrace a broader concept of human dignity. We have to see people who are charged and are convicted of crimes as members of our community from the beginning of their involvement with the criminal justice system and to treat them accordingly. And what I've seen so far here, I was very encouraged by the governor's remarks yesterday, and what I've observed at this conference and what I've observed at the Department of Corrections, that I'm confident that Oregon is well on its way to supporting and engaging this population in a constructive and effective manner from the moment that they get involved with the criminal justice system until that ends. So our guests will be the first to acknowledge that the Norwegian prison system isn't perfect, but in my travels, it stands out as being incredibly thoughtful and humane, and it presents a coherent philosophical and practical approach to imprisonment that is lacking in our country and many others. That is why we are so fortunate to have had the privilege of learning from the Norwegians and having them here today to share their insights and knowledge with us. Thank you very much.